Prepare to experience the beauty of Genoa, starting from its sea. Walk from the old port of Genoa through a maze of dark and narrow alleyways, known as the ancient caruggi, snaking their way through the historical center of the city. These alleyways are crisscrossed by blades of light, children playing, old ladies with their shopping trolleys, tourists and people from around the world in search of beauty, or perhaps fortune, street performers, small shops, bars and restaurants managed by native and new residents. The caruggi can become so narrow that by the time you reach Via Garibaldi, you may actually feel as if you've rediscovered the sky. This historic via used to be called Strada Nuova, before being renamed in honor of Giuseppe Garibaldi, the Italian hero who set out from Genoa with his famous 1,000 patriots to liberate and unify Italy. The previous name, Strada Nuova, meant new street, and this was because it had been built in the mid-16th century as one of the most fascinating examples of European urban planning. Genoa had been an independent republic for 500 years by then, but it had only recently transformed into an aristocratic republic, due especially to the influence of corsair Andrea Doria, who had created a solid alliance with the Emperor Charles V, King of Spain. Charles V was said to control such a vast territory that the sun never set upon it. He possessed the greatest military and economic force in Europe, and thus required much liquidity. Andrea Doria and the rich merchants of Genoa soon became his personal bankers. The Aristocratic Republic was made up of 28 associations called alberghi. The members of these associations all came from the new and old nobility, and their names would be sorted to form a council, which then elected the most important political figure, the Doge, just like in the Republic of Venice. At the time of Andrea Doria, the Doge was also a patrician, and he would hold office for 2 years. He presided over one council of 8 senators and another of 8 procurators, which held financial powers. The behavior of the Doge was expected to be rigorous, with clearly defined boundaries. In a sense, the Doge was confined to a gilded cage, in Latin, captivus in urbe, or prisoner in the city. In order to avoid corruption, the Doge could only leave the palace on specific days and occasions established by protocol. He embodied the very personification of Genoa, which had already been nicknamed La Superba by Renaissance humanist Petrarch and was gearing up for its moment of greatest splendor yet. A period which historian Fernand Braudel called the Genoese century. This is the context in which the aforementioned Strada Nuova was designed, utility as well as beauty. A steep terrain was leveled to build upon and divided into 8 lots to be auctioned to wealthy buyers who would then build majestic palaces to display their power. The money that came from these sales would be used by the city to finance the restoration of the cathedral. But, as we were saying, in that day, Genoa was an aristocratic republic. A republic, not a kingdom. And as a republic, it didn't have the official facilities necessary to host those illustrious guests that were flocking to visit it. Princes, ambassadors, cardinals, feudal lords. These were all the types of people that couldn't simply be put in the small inns around the port. And so, in 1576, when most palaces had finally been constructed, the Senate of the Republic decreed a list of houses for public accommodation. These were, of course, the grandest buildings of the city, including those of Strada Nuova, and they belonged to the richest and most powerful families. These buildings were registered on a roll of paper called rotolo or rollo, which included around 50 buildings, and this number would more than double in the following decades. Each building was assigned a category, first, second, or third, on the basis of their comfort and magnificence, a bit like the stars of modern-day hotels. And this categorization determined who could stay there. Despite this well-studied system, there was some randomness at play as well. When an important person was expected, the building that would host them would be sorted. We can imagine that for Genoese families, it was an honor to have such illustrious guests, and perhaps an opening for new business opportunities. But it could probably be an annoyance as well, especially since all expenses, with few exceptions, rested on the shoulders of the host. However, any displeasure remained in the background as visitors were dazzled by the beauty they came to see. Each of these lucky guests was enchanted by the buildings. Such was the case of the Flemish artist Pieter Paul Rubens, who stayed in Genoa several times and loved the city so much that in 1622, in Antwerp, he published a book on the palaces of Genoa. This work reported the minutest details on the facades of the buildings, as well as their layouts and sections, and to this day, it's considered a prime resource when studying the Rolli palaces.
Palais de Rolli.
But let us return to the Strada Nuova, or Via Garibaldi, as it's known today. And let's walk amongst the tourists as they marvel at it. In 2006, UNESCO sanctioned the importance of these streets and the system of the Rolli palaces by including 42 of the buildings in the World Heritage List. Palazzo Angelo Giovanni Spinola is one of these, and you are its latest guests. Proof that the Rolli system is alive and well. The palace you're about to experience was registered in the first list, or Rollo, back in 1576 as one of the buildings reserved to the most illustrious guests. It stands in the most prized of the lots, the second widest in Strada Nuova, larger than 2,000 square meters. It was acquired after a fraught public auction in 1558 by Angelo Giovanni Spinola of Lucoli, banker of the Spanish crown and ambassador of the Republic. The palace's design was entrusted to Giovanni Ponzello, a very popular architect in Liguria at the time, who would then also become the trusted architect to the Doria family. Angelo Giovanni Spinola himself died only a couple of years after the works began, and his son Giulio would inherit the property and the project, although he was barely 11 years old at the time. Giulio would only complete the decoration and expansion of the palace 20 years later, as he was committed to military activities and important battles, such as the Battle of Lepanto, the first Christian victory against the Ottoman Empire. 1592 to 1594 would be a decisive period for completing the building, as 4 of the best painters of the time started working on the frescoes of the palace, including its facade. The decision to paint some of the architecture rather than to build it might appear fascinating to us today, but at the time, it was probably a way for Giulio to reduce the cost of such an expansive venture. Despite this, however, it can hardly be said that the palace came cheap, especially considering how it has the largest cycle of 16th century frescoes of the entire city. The atrium is already proof of this. Indeed, if you're listening from the inside of the palace, we can start from the atrium and the vestibule to see the beauty surrounding us. This is the public part of the building, meaning that it's visible to the people at large, and that's why Giulio Spinola used it to homage the most celebrated members of his house, which can here be seen depicted in Roman garb, as they uphold the family insignia on a shield. One of the greatest victories of the Spinola family is depicted in the center of the vault, inside an octagonal frame, the Battle of 1330, in which Gherardo Spinola prevailed against the Florentines. The lunettes surrounding it represent allegorical figures of virtues, such as eternal glory and Christian faith. Here, on the ground floor, Giulio Spinola is portrayed as returning to Genoa, victorious in battle, alongside a depiction of the winged victory. The cycle of frescoes is by the brothers Aurelio and Felice Calvi. Their style is clearly still influenced by that of Perin del Vaga, one of the most influential and talented students of the master Raffaello, and who had worked on commission from Andrea Doria. On the ground floor, today, there's a branch of Deutsche Bank. The building was owned by the Spinola family up until 1919, when it was transferred to a French banking institution, and later to Banca d'America ed Italia, which was subsequently absorbed by Deutsche Bank. The noble floor, from 1930 until about 15 years ago, housed the Circolo Artistico Tunnel, a private club for Genoese gentlemen, including entrepreneurs, industrialists, and men of culture. Even the composer Giuseppe Verdi was known to attend its events. Nowadays, the noble floor has once again reverted to private use, and this is definitely where the old magic of the Rolli palaces can still be found. In order to reach it, you can either take an old-fashioned elevator, but if your legs are up to it, it's worth taking the monumental stairs, with their grotesque frescoes depicting mythological scenes. Right at the top of the staircase, you'll be greeted by a marble Roman bust. This is the first of many, which decorates several rooms in the palace. Carlo Clavarino, the new owner, restored and furnished the 2,000 square meter noble floor as faithfully as possible in honor of the wonder and spirit of the time. The very first space, the antechamber, presents a beautiful fresco that itself lends us the key through which to interpret the other frescoes in the house. The central subject is a scene from the life of Alexander the Great after the Battle of Issus against the Persians. Instead of killing the mother of his opponent, Darius, he welcomed her to court. Giulio Spinola gave his painters two major directives: to emphasize human and moral virtues rather than merely military skills, and to highlight female characters as much as possible. The artist Bernardo Castello certainly succeeded in satisfying his patron's desire in this painting. The central hall was used for parties and dinners, and it'll take your breath away. But before gasping for air and observing it in all its candlelit splendor, think of what it had been reduced to. Cold and dark, its astonishing chandelier covered in dust, and a couple of dead pigeons on the floor. This was due to the neglect of an investor from Monte Carlo who, a few years ago, had lost interest in his investment when it became clear that he couldn't make it as profitable as he had hoped. However, rooms such as these are destined to amaze again. Indeed, it's even become the symbol of Genoa's rebirth, thanks to the efforts of the Friends of Genoa, a foundation which holds its headquarters here. Its stated goal? Return this glorious city to its leading role. Aeon, as a prime investor in culture, is one of its founding partners, and Palazzo Spinola is Aeon Italia's representative office. Today at your feet is perhaps the largest carpet you'll ever walk on, comparable in size to those found at Versailles, the Savonnerie. This carpet isn't French, however, but Persian, with a stronger weave and thread, and Clavarino had to travel to New York in order to track it down. The motif is similar to the mosaic patterns that were so popular in Venezia in the 1700s, called graniglia patterns. Its original owner was an English nobleman, the Duke of Rutland. The frescoes decorate both the ceiling and the sides, painted by artists from Andrea Semino's workshop, one of the leading schools of painters in Genoa at the time. The paintings on the walls create the illusion of expansion and further open up the space to idealize landscapes through the perspective of the colonnade. On the ceiling, more depictions from the life of Alexander the Great, including an episode from the Battle of Issus. Here we see Alexander taming Bucephalus, the horse which soon became his most trusted steed. Also, Alexander meeting Aristotle, Alexander meeting the cripples, and in the center, a scene dedicated to his charming manner with women, his encounter with the queen of the Amazons, Thalestris, who would become his lover and wished to bear his children. In reality, as noted by a poet of the time who knew the painters personally, the posture of the two with their arms hanging down hardly seems enthusiastic. What could they be saying to each other? Bernardo Castello is once again the painter of the frescoes in the warm living room to the left of the hall. Here we can see scenes from ancient Rome with Anthony and Pompey. We also finally see paintings hanging on the walls. Each of these was carefully selected by Carlo Clavarino to represent the vein of the time. Flemish painting was hugely in vogue then. And so here we find two works in the style of Van Dyck, one painting by Jan Ross, known in Italy as Giovanni Rosa, and even a painting by Domenico Fiasella, a Genoese painter of the early 17th century. Alongside the paintings, you'll also see brass candelabras, ceramic pastiche, and handcrafted contemporary short tables. Each of these elements would have made Giulio Spinola feel right at home. Each palace needs a gallery of ancestors' portraits. In this case, Carlo Clavarino has chosen those of his extended family, his friends and acquaintances, painted by Genoese artists such as Bernardino Strozzi. His family became part of the Genoese patricians around 1450, and since during this time these families often intertwined, it stands to reason that some of his ancestors had a connection to this palace, or, at the very least, that they would frequent it. Clavarino's tireless passion and effort towards this building's revival has the power to create a strong and precious bond between past and present. He has also placed personal photographs among the ancestors and in other rooms as well. Some of these are family photographs. Others are carefully chosen to shock the bourgeoisie, as Baudelaire would have said. Clavarino is standing next to Barack Obama, the Queen of England, the King of Spain. Each of these images is also a symbol of gratitude for his life up until now. As in the next room, the frescoes here are by Bernardo Castello. Spinola was a great admirer of Octavian Augustus, the Roman emperor known for his skill in war, as well as his commitment to art during peacetime. Here, he is being celebrated for his victory over Antony and Cleopatra. Finally, we reach the dining room. Once again, the scene of rich candlelit dinners, specifically 56 candles in one of the greatest wooden chandeliers in the world, dating back to 1675, and of which only two exist. One in the Corsini Palace in Florence, and this one, which already belonged to the Spinola family. As this is a dining room, the paintings are those of still lifes in the Flemish style by Abraham Bruegel, a descendant of Pieter Bruegel. The frescoes, on the other hand, are dedicated to the life of Scipio. As we move further inwards, here is one of the most remarkable rooms in the palace, where the line between inside and outside becomes blurred, and our gaze is lost in the green of lush plants. Once upon a time, a door here led to a pensile garden, but the terrace where it grew was demolished at the beginning of the 1900s to build a tunnel for the rapidly growing number of cars. However, one of the wall frescoes keeps its image alive. Indeed, this room, just like the main one seen previously, was frescoed under the direction of Andrea Semino. Here we can see the death of Sophonisba, another mythical female figure and noble lady of ancient Carthage. The wonders are far from over, however, as we retrace our steps and walk back to the main room. For here, we'll find a secret room. Also, in the West Drawing Room, we can marvel at the frescoes by Lazzaro Tavarone, which recount the deeds of Julius Caesar in the latter part of his life alongside symbolic female figures. On the walls, we can admire portraits by legendary painters, Tintoretto and Rubens, the latter also author of the large tapestry. Moving on, we pass through a large part of the house that was originally considered of lesser importance. Nevertheless, it is charming, frescoed by the Calvi brothers, the same of the atrium, and decorated with paintings worthy of a museum, such as a small portrait attributed to the Flemish painter Hans Memling. And finally, the icing on the cake at the end of the corridor. The wooden library which covers the walls of this room follows the model of ancient libraries and was built by carpenters from San Patrignano, the largest drug rehabilitation center of Europe. Going up the stairs, you'll find that a few of the books are fake, and amongst them is a hidden button. Here is the secret room, a room that at the time of the Rolli would have been noted for its elegance and allure. The bed is towered by frescoes, surrounded by paintings and tapestries, and in the back, there is a mirrored bathroom with frescoes and grotesque motifs, where a small chapel used to sit. Look around yourselves. You're in another world. It's a world that vibrates among the notes of ancient history. A world that still exists today.